I don't think every designer needs to know code, but I think they need to know what code feels like, and they need to know what the tools are.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Mario. Welcome to another episode of Design Interview 10 Questions, where we interview designers and design experts from all around the world. Today, I'm with Zach Lieberman. Thanks, Zach, to be here.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So if you don't mind, I would start with the initial question, which is, what made you become a designer?
Yeah. So I had to get a job, and I was studying fine art, and everybody was talking about design. At that time, it was web design, so it was Web 1.0, and all of my friends in the art department were getting jobs in web design shops. So I got a job in one. I applied to a bunch, and I didn't have any portfolio. I just had slides of my paintings. I didn't have any background, but for some reason I got a job in this place, and I discovered you could go to the bookstore and you could buy a book about Photoshop. It was about this thick, and a book about Illustrator that was about this thick, and I learned these tools, and for me it was really exciting. I didn't really have a lot of experience with digital tools at that time, and so I was learning, and I learned Quark and all of this kind of things, and then I discovered Flash and ActionScript, and from that, for me, that was this really amazing moment that opened the door for me. So, but really, it was kind of a necessity of finding a job. I also, at that time, I discovered all of this really nice writing, like all of the Stephen Heller books and Ellen Lupton, like design writing research. I got quite interested in the books around graphic design and the language of graphic design. So at that time, I was like trying to, in addition to learning the tools, I was also just kind of really excited about the history and tradition of design.
And I mean, you probably developed your idea about what is design and it's quite different comparing when you started. So today, What is design for you?
Yeah, I mean, I work in a kind of field, I would say, of generative design, where a lot of the projects I'm working on, I'm designing software-based systems to create output, whether it's images or moving or interactive. And so I think about design really from a kind of programmatic and algorithmic standpoint, and that's a lot of my work is in that world. But design is really, really multifaceted. And so you have people who think really deeply about typography or think really deeply about, covers and packaging and, service design. I don't know. It's like a really wide field. The field that I am in, I spend a lot of time thinking about is the kind of field of generative design and of kind of what is the intersection of software, especially software that we write. So not like custom tools as opposed to off the shelf products for solving problems.
And I mean, you said like generative design, and I mean, we all know, I guess, your like composition, like your motion design, let's say, but behind that surface of what we see on the screen, what do you think you create as a designer?
I mean, I'm creating these systems. I think of myself really as a kind of systems designer, where you're designing these living things as software. So you have inputs and outputs. You have some data that's coming in, and that could be data that's coming from people. That could be, it could be data visualization where you have a data source. It could be really just math and using kind of the beauty of numbers. Then you have some form of output where it's motion or graphical form. And I think of myself as this kind of like building those machines that take those inputs and produce those outputs and try to create some kind of holistic system, which is not really which is like true and honest and not designed to be flashy or shiny.
I mean, when we met a couple of years ago, I asked you like all like the stuff you upload on Instagram, like how do you create them? And you told me
Yeah,
most of them are like part of the process when I try
yeah.
to design something for clients and so on. Uh, is that the part of the process that you really like when you design something for a client, for example? Or are you
Yeah.
interested more in something else?
I mean, both. What I post on the things I post on Instagram, in a way, they are like, um, it's like I'm a wildlife photographer. So I'm kind of like building this kind of crazy thing, and then I think like, okay, we need to capture it at specific moments, like, and when you capture it, it's exciting to, you know, to find some. It's like you found something in the wild and you want to share it, and you're excited about some kind of beautiful moment, which is evocative of this thing that you've created. Evocative of this thing that you created, and for me, that's exciting. Like getting getting the chance to share, what you found. But then in the end, I mean, one thing that I really like about posting the sort of stuff, like posting these daily sketches and iterating, is that also I really like trying to understand what a thing is by making lots of versions of the same thing. So if I kind of keep changing and changing and changing and kind of like push a little thing here, push a little thing here, push a little thing here, it feels like through the act of just doing the same thing again and again and again, but almost from different angles, then I can understand what it is. Like, you don't know what it is, but if you can see it from lots of viewpoints, then you can kind of piece out what it is.
When you understand, when do you understand that the project arrived at the end?
Yeah. I mean, there's moments when you're doing design work, if you have clients, then there are moments when you feel like, okay, client is happy and you're happy, and you've met what you need to. Sometimes you have specific deadlines, like you have, an event or something where there's a date, or a date that you publish something, and some projects never end. I mean, it is really about, yeah, it depends on context.
And do you think perfection exists in design?
Um, I think there are moments where if you stop, you have reached a high point, and then if you keep going, you get lower. Like, it's kind of like, you never really know, but there are moments where it's like it's really good. Like if you're a poker player, like there's a good moment to stop. So I feel like a lot of times some of the art is actually knowing what are those moments. Like, okay, I need, this is a good moment to stop. If I keep going, it's going to go downhill. Maybe it will go uphill again, but it's like, okay, I've reached a kind of local maximum. And I think that, um, yeah, part of it is finding those maximums.
And do you think you ever reached perfection in any of your works? Or is
No.
something that you say like I cannot judge my works?
Yeah. I also don't think like this stuff is like, I think there are projects that you work on where it's like, okay, that's, you will talk about this and you'll remember it for years, and it's important to you. It shapes who you are, and it's like an important part of your. There are projects that are really important for one reason or another, but I don't think they're necessarily about perfection. And I think that word is really dangerous. That I see a lot of students, for example, get so caught up in trying to make something perfect, and you keep changing. You spend forever in like, okay, it has to be perfect before I release it to the world. And the more energy and time you spend on something before you share it, the bigger the payoff has to be, right? If you spend a week making something, or a month, or a year, or 10 years, it has to have, the payoff has to be proportional to the amount of time you invest. So for me, I don't know. I think that word is really dangerous.
We are now in a contemporary moment of design,
Yeah.
the scene, and I mean you are like one of the biggest name of the moment because what you are doing.
No, no,
So,
I don't think so.
but uh, I mean, yeah, I think it's a good moment now for what you are doing because
Yeah.
it's developing a lot at the moment.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about contemporary design?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it is um, this world where it's easier and easier to share. There's more and more images. There's more and more, um, for me, it's an exciting time to be a designer. Like if I was coming up, like this is a really exciting and feels, when I was a student, there was no YouTube. There was no, it was impossible to make and share. It was so hard to share a video, right, of anything moving. Like it was really hard in the early 2000s. And so it's like, it becomes easier to like make and share and build an identity around what you do and what you love. And so I think that makes it quite exciting. But I also think it's a very strange moment where most of our consumption, we spend a lot of time staring at phones and a lot of times with these small screens and these flat interfaces that are not, they're not they're not really pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Like if you think about this, like this movement, right, and how most of us are, how we are consuming design in a way, and how we are producing and sharing design, it's through these interfaces that are like don't invite you to have deep conversation or deep reflection. So it's very much like just like looking. I like this. It's very fleeting in a way. So I think it's a challenge for designers to figure out like how do you create things which are more meaningful in the context of this.
And what do you think instead of the impact the internet had on design?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have experience with pre-internet design. I just know, like, I look at things like these magazines. If you think about like Emigre magazine or these things that are just like tangible objects, physical objects, I think we need more of that. We need more, um, we need more physical things and more ways of experiencing design that are not, on a small screen. Um, and you see it. I think also you see it a lot. Like if you look on Instagram, you see a lot of people recording their hands doing things. Like for me, one of my fascinations is watching calligraphy and you watch people painting, letter forms. And they're so popular, like all these channels where people are drawing. And I think it's because we miss the physical, right? If we're staring at our screens all day, we miss the physicality. And so I'm always interested in technologies that bring the physical back. So for example, AR for me is really exciting because then now you're moving in space, right? You're drawing in space, or even when you have filters, face filters, like you're moving your face around and suddenly it's about your body and exploring computational systems through movement. And for me, that's really exciting. So, and I think there's a lot to be done. And I think it's a really exciting time, but I think it's also maybe a transitionary time because this, like if you, I mean, I don't ride the subway right now, but like when you would ride the subway, you would see everybody's just kind of staring at their screen and nobody's talking to each other. And it's feels like a weird moment. Like I think we're heading towards some other moment where we have, computation on our body, but in a different way.
So, and do you think it's important to merge these two things? So, like to bring back like the analog part with the
Yeah.
digital part somehow.
Yeah. And I think that's exciting. And there are beautiful things that we can do with that. So, I mean, for me, I think there's a lot of beauty there because we have these devices, right? And we're holding on to them. So if we can use them for creation, if we can use them for exploration, if we can use them for play and not just consumption, then, I mean, for me, that's a beautiful feeling.
But was it easy for you at the beginning to start like your career as a generative designer?
Yeah. I mean, I really came up through more, I would say, the media art scene. So when after I had this job in a design studio, I went to graduate school and I couldn't get into graphic design programs. I was applying to graphic design programs, but I didn't have a portfolio. So I could get into these like experimental design technology programs. And I got into one and for me, I discovered kind of the media art world, and with my career sort of coming up is through the arts. So I would go to Ars Electronica, which is a big electronic arts festival in Austria, go to Dutch Electronic Arts Festival. There are all these media centers around England, in France, and, create projects, teach workshops, and kind of came up through the art side of things. And it's almost more recently that my work has pulled back towards design. So as a commercial practice, I would be doing kind of generative design work or doing interactive work for brands and so on. But it's almost more recently that I've been sort of pulled back to that tradition. And so I sort of started thinking I'm going to be a designer, and then I went in this media art world and have come back to design.
You are a teacher, and I was wondering what do you think about design education? Because in some way, like, is still like the old school,
Yeah.
but we can also see that now the design world is also going into this like coding and moving stuff, which are
Yeah.
not really like pushed from the schools.
Yeah. I mean, I think all schools are really different. Maybe I explain the schools I teach in, and then I don't have a lot of context on like traditional design education. I taught at Parsons for a long time, which is a design school. And at Parsons, I taught in that kind of experimental program that's all around design technology. So that, they're very, very much my role was helping demystify coding and help artists and designers and folks that have creative backgrounds get into code and explore it as a creative medium and approach it as a tool for, for systems thinking, for generative thinking. And now I help run a school called the School for Poetic Computation. That's a school around kind of exploring the nature of creating artwork and poetry through code. And I teach classes there that are very much around kind of the mechanics of working with software, but also through looking at artists from the past, looking at designers from the past and studying their work and really almost in a kind of archaeological way, engaging with the past through kind of a modern lens. If we can recreate work from the past using modern tools, we can understand those tools. We can kind of have a dialogue with the past. So the formulation of my class is very much about kind of learning code, but through history. And then I'm also a professor at MIT in the Media Lab. And the Media Lab is a really unique place that looks at kind of the intersection of computation and media in the world through all different types of lenses. And I'm at the Media Lab primarily because I feel really closely connected to John Maida and Miro Cooper and the kind of design tradition that was started there around looking at and exploring the intersection of computation and design. So I teach classes there that are very much in that kind of, inspiration. I don't know that much about kind of the field of design education exactly, but I have a lot of like the educators that I know I'm really excited about, and the projects that I know I'm really excited about. But I don't know. I can't really speak like more broadly about design education.
Now the role of the designer is changing because I mean
Yeah.
it's developing a lot because of
Mhm.
technologies, of human progress, and so on.
Yeah.
But what kind of role the designer will have in the future, in your opinion?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I always am excited about um, artists and designers that can really like work in a very fluid way between hardware and software, and really connect, make interesting connections between things. And um, so I believe it's important, maybe not to I don't think every designer needs to know code, but I think they need to know what code feels like, and they need to know what the tools are. So if you have a really wide knowledge of all the different tools that exist, then you can, in your way, you can expand, and your ideas can really kind of increase. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this stuff changes all the time, and so you always have these new things that pop up, and they're kind of like fads, like AI, machine learning, AR, VR, etc. And it is. I think it's important to explore what they are and what they feel like, but also not get caught up in the moment, right? Not feel like, okay, because everything will be popular for a few years, right? And everybody will talk about now it's machine learning, and everybody will experiment with it and play with it. But I think it's important to think of these things as waves, and your job is to surf, but you don't, like, the waves come and go, but your job is to kind of like really think about the art and the poetry of what you want to make, and not necessarily the technology.
Today we are facing this moment of global pandemic, which is really,
Yeah.
really bad. But do you think the designer can do something for this moment, or
Yeah, of course. I mean, you think about, there's so many things where like you need to communicate ideas to the public, you need to show people that you care, you need to spread messages, you need to help educate, you need to create low tech solutions to high tech problems. I mean, to me, it's um, there's all kinds of need for design in a variety of ways. Whether it is um, there there are all kinds of needs for design. I mean, there are all kinds of when I walk around the street, I see people who are crafting their own masks, and you see people putting signs in their windows. You see people 3D printing personal protective equipment for hospitals. You see people, even creating like local groups to check in on each other. And I'm in a local group, and there's somebody there who every day is taking the data and making charts. And that's a form of design. That's a data visualization. And every day, I'm getting charts that he's creating that are telling us the story, that are trying to take the numbers and the data and tell a story with them. And so I feel like there's so many. Design is about creating interfaces with the unknown. That design is around helping you explore and navigate things you don't understand yet. And this is a moment of unknown. This is a moment of not understanding. And so I think design is really important.
well, thank you, Zach. I mean, this was the last question. Thank you
Yep. Okay.
for your words and take
Yeah.
care for everything.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, take care.